Well, thanks for joining us. Now, there's a significant shift in the U.S. immigration policy, which comes with global implications. The Trump administration has announced it will end temporary protected status for Somali nationals, a designation that has allowed thousands to live and work legally in the United States of America for decades. Now, the administration says conditions in Somalia no longer justify the protection. Now, critics argue the country remains unstable and warn that the decision could put lives at risk. The move raises broader questions about humanitarian responsibility, migration, and America's role on the world stage. Now, to help us unpack this issue, we're being joined by Mohamedou Sheikh, who's the chairman, Dariel Human Rights Organization, and Elias Adam, who's a human rights legal advocate. We also have Abdallah Mumin, who's the Secretary General, Somali Journalist Syndicate. And also we have the Director, Refugee and Migrants Rights Division, Human Rights Watch, Bill Frelick. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to kickstart by asking you, Bill Frelick. Temporary protected status, of course, was designed as a humanitarian response to conflict and natural disaster. From an international standpoint, how significant is the U.S. decision to end the TPS for Somalis, and what does it signal about Washington's involvement and their approach to humanitarian migration?
The threats to people's lives are oftentimes broader than the threat of persecution, which is the asylum standard in the Refugee Convention. And so temporary protected status, like other forms of what are called complementary protection, are ways in which governments can address real threats to people's lives because of widespread human rights violations, because of ongoing armed conflict, because of natural disasters, drought, the causes of which are considered to be or hope to be temporary, but what has ended up happening with temporary protected status is these situations have continued, and you would think that armed conflict would come to an end at a certain point, but you see this sort of revolving situations where the combination of factors of violence, of lawlessness, of economic deprivation, of environmental degradation combine to make a country dangerous for people, generally unsafe, and needing a broader form of protection than is afforded by the Refugee Convention. And so the U.S., among which many other countries have also done, and the Africa continent, actually, in the African Union Convention, has in its refugee definition itself a broader refugee, an expanded refugee definition, which is not the case in part of the United States. The United States uses temporary protected status to do just that. Now, what the Trump administration has done is not just to end temporary protected status for Somalis, and whatever it says about the situation in Somalia having improved, the fact of the matter is that the U.S. is ending temporary protected status for Haitians, for Venezuelans, for Cameroonians, for Syrians, for Afghans. It doesn't seem to really matter what the conditions on the ground are, where we have situations that obviously involve high levels of violence and generalized chaos in a country like Haiti, and the U.S. ends temporary protection status regardless. And so I think this has very little to do with the situation on the ground in Somalia, which is essentially unchanged. There were 300,000 newly displaced people last year. There continues to be drought and many of the conditions that leave people displaced. Humanitarian assistance is I think only 19% funded last year for Somalia, and food insecurity is very high for millions of people. So this really has nothing to do with the actual situation in Somalia and the need for protection. It has much more to do with the politics in the United States and the current Trump administration wanting to end any sort of generalized protection for people that are needing to be protected from these dangerous situations. At the same time, the Trump administration is attacking the asylum system for people that have individual claims based on a fear of persecution, and has ended, for all intents and purposes, overseas refugee resettlement of refugees throughout the entire world, with the exception of white South Africans, which again tells you that underlying much of this policy is a racist approach that basically wants to get rid of black and brown immigrants in the United States, has used extremely racist language to describe Somali refugees in Minnesota and Michigan, and Haitian refugees in Ohio, and many of the enforcement efforts are directed specifically against people that appear to be foreigners on the basis of their skin color and the jobs that they work in. There's a recent Supreme Court case based on what was happening in Los Angeles, which essentially allowed this racial profiling to take place.
All right, let me come to you now, Elias Adams. The administration argues that conditions in Somalia have improved sufficiently to justify this move. But how does that assessment align with recent reports from United Nations, humanitarian agencies, and even security analysts operating in the Horn of Africa?
Thank you so much. Based on the concrete reports that depict Somalia as a place of armed conflict, the claim of the Trump administration that the situation has improved absolutely does not reflect the facts on the ground in Somalia. But apart from this, we can see that the racial profiling that sending ICE law enforcement to target Somali communities in Minnesota and in other places, I think this is a policy of, as Bill Frelick has described, is a racist policy to target an entire population and put them under the suspicion of also accusing them fraud and also supporting terrorism in Somalia. In Horn of Africa is ridiculous and does not reflect any sort of legality or other facts based on concrete reports. So this is what the policy of the White House currently, the current administration in the White House, is clearly reflects racism and targeting an entire community, which is absolutely ridiculous and absurd thing to do.
I'm going to come to you now, Mohammed Sheikh. Somalia continues to face, persistent threats from, armed groups and even political instability and even climate-driven displacement. Now, given those realities, how realistic is it to expect that large numbers of people safely return and reintegrate?
Yeah, thank you. Somalia continues to face the ongoing insecurity, terrorist violence, political instability, climate and related disaster, and which instability, climate disaster, and widespread displacement, those conditions do not support the safe and dignified return to individuals who have been living lawfully in the United States temporarily. In this, it's not an immigration issue, it is a human rights issue. Protecting vulnerable communities, strengthening society, and follow the rule of reflecting shared global values.
All right, so let me come to you, Abdelmumin. What impact could the forced return of thousands of Somali nationals have on Somalia's already fragile, political and economic systems, particularly in urban areas struggling with unemployment and limited infrastructure?
Thank you very much for having me to your program. I have had the opportunity to speak to many Somalis in Minnesota late November and December for my article, who told me this level of stress and the concern they have as this new Trump policy was coming into effect. Let us be clear on this thing. It's not only the, as they call, illegal aliens in the United States, including Somalis, but we have seen a wider or broad kind of policies that target different communities, including those who have got also legitimate concerns to live in the United States. That's why you have seen the new policy which targets the TBS, which was legally status provided by the United States government to the people from different countries, including Somalis, because they were deemed that they cannot return back to their country of origin because it was not safe. Now, let's come to the point of your question. Returning these communities to countries like Somalia, especially in the southern Somalia, will eventually cause a new disaster. We are talking about Somalia, where 4 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. Over 2 million people of those communities are already living in unsafe displacement camps in and outside of the main cities, mainly in the southern Somalia, including Mogadishu, the capital city. So returning or snatching people from Minnesota and throwing them all the way to Somalia is a major humanitarian disaster. And this is something that we should all be discussing. And we have seen that different calls by certain human rights groups, but also this also needs a coordinated effort to stop these things. Somalia now is on the verge of collapse. You have seen reports, including reports by the United States government, that Al-Shabaab, the terrorist group, is on the verge of capturing Mogadishu, the capital. That's also very credible. A day or 2 days ago, I've seen reports by the United States government, including the Trump advisor himself, declaring Somalia, southern Somalia, as a place which is not safe for civilians living already there. So, in conclusion, this is merely a discriminatory policy. That's very clear. This is intended to classify as fighting illegal migration. But what we have seen is that in the increasing of the armed conflict, insecurity, and the conditions that led to these people come to has not changed. And this is only going to cause more marginalization and more family separations, economic disruption, and community stress.
Let me come back to you now, Mohammed Sheikh. Neighboring countries in East Africa, we know that they already host to large refugee populations. Now, could this decision increase, regional migration pressure, and how might it even affect broader stability in the Horn of Africa? Mohammed Sheikh, I'm hoping you can hear me. Okay, looks like we've lost contact with him. But let me move the question now to you, Abdel Mumin. As I asked earlier, the question I asked you was neighboring countries, of course, in East Africa, we know already host large refugee populations. Could this decision increase regional migration pressure, and how might it even affect, broader stability in that region?
Sure. Yes, the conversation is already there. Somalis in Kenya, for example, one of the neighboring countries to Somalia, has got a large Somali refugee population. Many of them are already becoming residents, but also very concerned. We have seen a recent discussion publicly on the media trying to portray the Somali community in Kenya as like bad actors. We have seen reports saying that the fraud claim in Minnesota has been already linked to Somalis in Kenya. This is a very concerning situation to Somalis already, including the refugee population in Kenya. And my concern is that this will lead another copy-paste kind of policies in other countries, including those in East Africa, in Kenya. Kenya will have an election in the year 2027. And the fear now is that the profiling against Somalis is already making sense on the ground. And that might lead, as the election year comes near, to something that can transform into large kind of operation similar to what we have seen in 2014, when a huge number of Somali population was being detained, arrested, rounded up, and thrown back into concentration camps where the Kenyan government was targeting specifically the Somali community. So the concern is now already existing, and the ground is already very concerning to many Somalis. By the way, according to the recent report by Amnesty International, a large number of the refugees coming from Somalia are now becoming climate-related things, because climate change is affecting inadvertently in Somalia, and a lot of people are fleeing the country to Kenyan refugee camps. So the concern is already there, and not only in East Africa, but let's talk about the wider countries of the European countries. And here in the UK, discussion about migrants and the migrant population coming into this country has been something going on, and Somalis were part of that as well. So we have seen a kind of the coordinated kind of campaigns that try to portray or make the communities, the refugee communities and the migrant communities, in a very bad way. And this is something concerning. And this is going right into the play of the right-wing groups, which is very concerning, not only in the United States, but also in the wider global scenario.
Well, let me go back to you, Mr. Frelick. I'm hoping you're still here with us. Historically, right, the TPS decision have been shaped by, both humanitarian need and political priorities. How does this move compare with, past U.S. administrations' handling of the TPS for countries experiencing prolonged instability?
Well, the U.S. has used this as a tool for quite a number of years. It came into being in 1990 and was originally used for Central Americans in the United States, mostly Salvadorans at the time, and has been used for various nationalities since that time by both Republican and Democratic administrations. That 1990 was under the first George Bush administration. And so the U.S. has used TPS, I would say, to do two things. One is to provide a broader basis of protection to people, particularly those who don't meet the narrow refugee convention definition of a well-founded fear of persecution, but people fleeing generalized violence and conditions of environmental disaster, for example, and the combination of those things, which you see in places like Somalia, but also to signal to other countries, as Mr. Mumin just was saying. TPS is an important designation because it signals to Kenya that the U.S. considers it unsafe to return people to Somalia. It signals when Myanmar, Burma, gets a TPS designation, which it got. It signals to Bangladesh and to Thailand that the U.S. is seeking to protect those people, and they should be protected in the neighboring countries as well. And similarly with Afghan refugees, it was a very important signal to the Pakistani government, which hosted the large majority of Afghan refugees, that the U.S. Felt that this was a real refugee population and needed to be protected. And now, with the U.S. having dropped TPS for all of those nationalities, or threatening to drop it for all of those nationalities, the governments like Pakistan are in fact engaging in roundups and pushing back Afghan refugees. And as Mr. Mumin was suggesting, the same fear applies. We've seen it in the 2014-2015 period in Kenya. The idea that the Kenyan government would basically say, without international support, and the U.S. not only has cut off refugee resettlement, ending TPS, but has also stopped humanitarian assistance for the most part, almost entirely, really, for the refugees in the region, and that sends a signal to other countries that's really alarming, and I think that's something that we have to factor factor in as well. And of course, the impact on the European Union, which is, as we speak, is considering a new changing of their returns directive that would enable them to create return hubs and returns of people to third countries and so on. So I think that the example that the U.S. is setting and the cutoff of humanitarian funding, as well as blocking of terminating of TPS and the suspension of refugee resettlement, you put these factors together, and it's really quite alarming.
Let me come to you now, Elias Adam. Domestically, Somali communities in the U.S. have become, deeply integrated over the past 3 decades. Now, from a global migration perspective, what are the consequences? What do you think the consequences are of reversing, long-term protections for diaspora populations? Mr. Adams, I'm hoping you can still hear me. Okay, so in case you cannot, perhaps I'll just take the question. I'll just move the question to Abdelmumin. Abdelmumin, I don't know if you heard me earlier, but I asked the question. I said domestically, right? When we look at it domestically, Somali communities in the U.S. have become deeply integrated over the past 3 decades. Now, from a global migration perspective, what are the consequences of reversing long-term protections for diaspora populations?
Sure. Yeah, this will have a long-term consequences for the Somali migrants. Look, these communities, we are not only referring to a small community or a small individuals. We are referring to an estimation being given recently by the media, 2,500 Somalis with TBS protection. And you know what? I have been talking to, for example, journalists who fled Somalia, and some of them are already having some families, and they were allowed to work because TBS provides the authority to legally work and live in the United States. That means these people were already earning income. They were already building families. Some of them have got young children, and these children are going to school. And imagine the loss of livelihood and dignity for all of these TBS holders when they are just snatched from the street or knock at their door overnight and being bundled on a flight to Kenya because they cannot send directly to Somalia. What we do understand now is that Somalia doesn't have the capacity to absorb and accept large number of refugees from the United States. So what we are expecting, most likely, is that the United States will be sending these people to other countries, like, for example, Kenya. Maybe. That's our estimation, our guess now, because Somalia cannot accept all of these things. So the loss of livelihood will be there, and there was also a mental health issue. The impact will be severe. Years of instability replaced by anxiety, trauma, and the uncertainty that these people have been living is also part of this, the impact and the consequences. The family separation is already there. I had spoken to one young man who told me that he has been living now for 2 years in the United States, and he has got the TBS, but also he had got a wife who is American citizen, and meaning that his TBS has been now suspended. That means he is eligible to be removed from the United States. That means he will lose access to family and access to his spouse, and that means he will also be losing other benefits he has been, including if he has been going to work on a daily basis, all of these things. These people have made efforts. They are legally living people there in the United States. They have not committed any crime, but they are being targeted just because they're Somalis, and that's very concerning. And the risk of deportation is also there. We understand that Somalia is actively in conflict. This is a country where terrorism is actively involved. We're talking about a very dangerous groups like Al-Shabaab, the ISIS, which the United States has been fighting for many decades now in Somalia alongside the African Union forces. So the situation has not changed. What we have seen is that the policies of the United States are changing rapidly. And this is indeed concerning. It shows the abandonment of the United States' commitment to human rights in the global scenario.
I'll come to you now, Elias Adams. I'm hoping you can hear me clearly. I'd like to know, because earlier Mr. Frelick said he doesn't think that this withdrawal or cancellation of temporary, the TPS now, had anything to do with what's happening back at home in Somali. Do you think, do you agree what he said, or do you think otherwise?
Basically, yes, I agree with him that this has nothing to do with what's happening inside Somalia, but rather this has a lot to do with the new policies of the Trump administration in the United States. It's Trump who decided to revoke the TPS, mainly targeting Somali refugees or Somali migrants in the United States, and also not only targeting them with the revocation of temporary protection, but also when you read his tweets, you will see that he's spreading insults and targeting them, describing them as garbage, describing the whole continent of Africa as a shithole countries. All this rhetoric and also his actions of revoking are not separable. All are related to him. All his policy.
Let me come back to you now, Mr. Frelick. Critics say that this decision undermines U.S. credibility on human rights, particularly at a time when Washington is urging other nations to uphold refugee protections. How damaging could this be?
The U.S., for all of its faults, has been over the decades a leader globally in providing refugee humanitarian assistance, in providing refugee resettlement, in setting examples for providing temporary protected status and asylum. And this is a dramatic reversal on all of those points. The ending of nearly all foreign humanitarian assistance, the ending of nearly all refugee resettlement, except for some white refugees, as I said before. The ending of temporary protected status, not just for Somalis, but basically for all the nationalities that have had temporary protected status in the past, and essentially making it nearly impossible for people to be granted asylum in the United States, people that do have individual claims as well. So across the boards, this is a very negative, very hostile demonstration of closing the doors to refugees. And what is worrisome is the U.S. Making an attempt, as it did at the opening of the last General Assembly meetings, to convince other countries to withdraw from the Refugee Convention, to essentially every country go their own way and exercise sovereignty however they see fit in whether they determined to receive refugees or provide protection to them or not. So this is a deeply disturbing trend. And what we're seeing with respect to Somalia, we're seeing with respect to Afghanistan, to Haiti, to Burma, Myanmar, to many other countries that are producing refugees, and where now the effort is to contain them, to keep them in place, and to give them no outlet when they are faced with famine, when they're faced with violence, when they're faced with rising sea levels that threaten their lives.
Let me come to you now, Abdul Amin. Looking at, of course, how things have unfolded in yesteryears and even right about now, how do you think Africa should approach refugees when it comes to dealing with refugees basically in the continent right now? Because today's America, tomorrow it could be another country.
Sure, Africa has got a large youthful population, and that is an opportunity for African communities underestimated for years. Perhaps this could be a signal for Africa, African people, especially those in East Africa, to learn from, to try to have a different policy. This conflict is that ongoing from Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia. This is not going to help the communities and the populations. The world is changing, and we have seen that. And the reality is that what's happening now in the United States could be a precedent for other countries to follow suit. And this is very concerning for that. So African leaders need to learn from this thing, to come up with a strategy that will help their communities and the people, especially the youthful population. Large number of these refugees in the United States are coming from Africa, including Somalia in the East Africa. And the reason is clear, because of these endless conflicts and the fragile economic that's existing there. If Africa becomes peaceful, then there will be no need for these refugees and migrants to flee their countries. That's one point. The African Union has become a place for autocrats. There is no decision at all. They have failed Africans for years and years. And that's where we need the change to start.
Let me come to you now, Elias Adams. Mr. Mumin just raised a particular point, which has to do with the African Union. How would you assess how far they've handled situations like this, and do you think they can be influential as regards issues like this happening in the future and perhaps so far or in history?
I think this is the first time in history that the African Union is put to test. I think the African Union, even lacking the experience of such a situation being confronted with in the past, but now the African Union has to consider its policies and think about a new policy for survival, because the world has changed, as my colleague has already now. The world is changing to more negative, as to the more negative aspect, where not only wars and natural disasters, but also the very politically, democratically elected leaders becoming hardliners and just calling for a shutdown of humanitarian assistance, and also targeting refugees, African refugees, and kicking them out of the USA and back to the African continent. I think the African Union should consider a policy where the African continent has to consider depending on itself, and also only partnering with those trustable partners from outside of Africa, not those who only focus on its natural resources, as the USA. I think USA only is now interested in the natural resources of Africa, but not in taking African migrants or refugees. So the policy, the entire policy of the African Union has to change, and they need now to focus on developing the continent and focusing on the young people, so that they can also benefit their young people and turn them into leaders of the future for Africa.
Well, let me come back to you, Mr. Frelick. Could this decision set a precedent for ending TPS for other nationalities, such as those from conflict-affected or even climate vulnerable countries? And how might that reshape global migration patterns?
That's exactly what the U.S. is doing. So this is happening with basically all the countries that have had temporary protected status, the ones that I've named: Afghanistan, Syria, Cameroon, Haiti. And Somalia is not alone. And as I said, that indicates that this really has very little to do with the actual need for TPS and the purported reasons for saying that the situation has improved in Somalia. It's remarkable that the situation, according to the Trump administration, is improving in Haiti, in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, and all these other places at the same time. That strains any credulity whatsoever. And of course, at the same time, to be cutting humanitarian assistance when you cut temporary protected status and refugee resettlement indicates that this is that there's another agenda at work here. The question going forward is this something that it can be repaired. I think this is an administrative action. It's an executive action. It doesn't change the underlying law in the United States. There's been no effort to do that thus far. It just changes the particular nationalities that get TPS, which it turns out to be nearly every nationality. And so I think a new administration that would come into being, whether it be Republican or Democratic, would look at the situations around the world and determine cases that were meriting a temporary protected status, and redesignate those countries that where it's appropriate to have temporary protected status in place. So I think this is these are executive actions. And I think that they would change with whatever new administration comes into being. And I actually don't think, I hope that this doesn't have much of an impact on countries in Europe and other places. But I think there's a rising xenophobia. There's the anti-immigrant sentiments are developing in other parts of the world. The use of immigrants and foreigners as scapegoats to gain political support, we've seen certainly in Europe and in other places, and the particularly with cutting off of humanitarian and development aid to the neighboring countries in the regions of conflict, is something that indicates that this could be used to push people back across borders directly, people who are trying to flee countries like South Sudan or the Democratic Republic of Congo, or whatever country it might be in the world where there is conflict and there is forced displacement taking place.
I'll come to you now, Abdul Mumin. Looking ahead, how might this policy choice influence international cooperation on displacement, refugee resettlement and crisis response, especially as the global forced migration reaches record levels?
We have recently seen reports of other countries, especially in the European continent, that have been starting to negotiate with Somali authorities to accept a certain amount of asylum seekers who have been already living in those countries. They include Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, and few other countries. United Kingdom is also, as according to some report, is also trying to make its way on convincing Somali authorities to accept a number of asylum seekers as they try to ease the burden of a number of new entries coming on the small boats on the channel in the United Kingdom. That is something that has been going on. But globally, the trend has seen recently very concerning situation. Look, these people have left Somalia because of the risk and the conflict that has been going on. Somalia still continues to face armed conflict with terrorist groups. Al-Shabaab and ISIS are still frequently attacking civilian population in main cities and rural areas. The political instability in the country is still there, and that's widening. And we have seen in the past few weeks the amount of the violence that has been spread across different regions in Somalia. The United States government itself is admitting the level of violence in Somalia has increased to the base from 2024 to 2025. Displacement and climate disaster is also there, with a number of refugees who have recently left Somalia to Kenya, people driven by the climate disaster that's happening inside Somalia. Claiming conditions have improved so far, enough for Somali refugees to return back does not reflect the reality on the ground. Returning people to insecurity violates their right to humanitarian protection, the right to live in a safe and dignified way in those countries. So globally, that's what's happening. But what is most important here is that Somali authorities themselves need to make clear that they do not have the capacity to absorb a large number of refugees. And this is something that I think will help eventually that other countries to understand about that. Because what I'm concerned here is that not only the Trump administration, but what I'm concerned is that other countries where Somali refugees were living, including Kenya, will be taking some, getting some motivation to do some violation of the rights of the refugees. That is where my concern is. And that's where advocacy should shift now for the international human rights groups.
All right, if you just joined us, I've been having a conversation with some incredible gentlemen. Mohammed Sheikh, the chairman of Dario Human Rights Organization, and also I've also had Ilyas Adam, who's a human rights legal advocate. Also Abdel Mumin, who's the Secretary General of the Somali Journalists Syndicate, also joined us, and Mr. Bill Frelick, Director, Refugee and Migrant Rights Division, Human Rights Watch. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for having this conversation with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, the decision underscores how immigration policy in the United States can carry far-reaching consequences well beyond its borders, affecting not only families, communities at home, but also fragile regions already under strain abroad. As legal challenges, diplomatic reactions, and humanitarian concerns continue to unfold, the debate over temporary protected status is likely to remain a flashpoint in broader discussions about migration and global responsibility. We, on The Conversation, will follow developments on this story. And that's all for today on The Conversation. Catch up on missed episodes on our News Central TV YouTube channel. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV, channel 422, GoTV, channel 23, Star Times, channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Till I come your way again, I am Chiwate Onyema. Good evening.